For years, Maria gave everything, her time, her love, her very self, to those she cared for most. She was the backbone of her family, the quiet force that held them together, yet she remained unseen, her sacrifices taken for granted. But when betrayal struck from within, leaving her with nothing but shattered trust and a lifetime of questions, Maria found herself at rock bottom. What she didn't know was that this moment would ignite a spark she never knew existed, a fire to reclaim not just her life, but her sense of worth. This is the story of how loss became liberation and pain transformed into power. Before we begin, drop a comment below to tell us where you're watching from. If you believe the truth always comes out, like and subscribe. And now, let the secrets unravel. The faint hum of traffic outside barely registered as Clara Thompson sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the eviction notice in front of her. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion. At 62 years old, she felt like a tree that had weathered too many storms, its roots finally giving way. Clara glanced around the small apartment that had been her refuge for the past year since losing everything. It was modest, some might call it shabby, but it had been home until now. She thought back to the life she once knew, before the walls seemed to close in on her, before Evan turned his back and left her to fend for herself. Her mind wandered to the farm, the one Henry had worked tirelessly to maintain, the same farm they'd hoped would someday provide security for their family. But after Henry's sudden death 10 years ago, Clara sold it, pouring every penny into raising Evan and ensuring he had opportunities she never did. Night shifts at the hospital, skipped meals, endless sacrifices, all so Evan could attend a prestigious university and build a future far removed from the hardships she endured. And yet, here she was, alone, betrayed. A sharp pang of anger flared within her as she remembered how easily Evan dismissed her pleas for help when she fell victim to the scam, a fraudulent investment scheme promising high returns that preyed on vulnerable retirees. "Mom, I can't bail you out," he had said coldly over the phone. "You should have been more careful." His words still stung, echoing through her mind like a cruel mantra. She replayed the moment she told him about the loss of her savings, the disbelief in his eyes quickly replaced by frustration. "How could you let this happen?" he snapped, as if she had done something reckless or selfish. And then came the final blow. "I need space. I can't deal with this right now." He moved out soon after, leaving Clara to face the consequences alone. As she sat there surrounded by boxes packed with memories she no longer wanted to carry, Clara allowed herself a rare indulgence. Tears. They streamed silently down her cheeks, each drop carrying decades of unspoken pain. But amidst the grief, something stirred deep inside her, a flicker of defiance. She wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and looked out the window. The city stretched beyond her view, indifferent yet full of possibility. If there was one thing Clara had learned during her long years of sacrifice, it was resilience. Little did she know a stranger's letter would soon arrive, setting off a chain of events that would change everything. The knock at the door came late in the afternoon, pulling Clara out of her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. Visits had become rare since Evan moved out. But when she opened it, there he was. Her son stood on the threshold, his face a storm cloud of frustration and anger. For a moment, hope flickered within her. Maybe he'd come to apologize, to make things right. But as soon as he stepped inside, his tone told her otherwise. "Mom," Evan began, pacing the small living room like a caged animal, "we need to talk." His voice carried an edge that made Clara's stomach tighten. She folded her arms across her chest, bracing herself. "What is it, Evan?" "It's about the money, the savings account. You emptied it, didn't you?" Clara blinked, stunned. "What are you talking about? I didn't touch the savings." "That's what I've been trying to tell you. It's gone because of the scam." Evan scoffed, shaking his head. "Don't lie to me. I checked the statements. Every penny is gone. Gone, Mom. And now you're sitting here acting all innocent while my life falls apart." Her heart sank. How could he believe this? After everything she'd done for him, after years of sacrifice, he thought she would deceive him. "I'm not lying, Evan," she said firmly, though her voice trembled. "I lost that money just like you did. It wasn't my fault. But Evan wasn't listening. His eyes burned with accusation. You know what? This is exactly why I can't trust you. You're always making excuses, always causing problems. Do you even realize how hard it is for me to keep bailing you out? Clara felt as if the floor had dropped beneath her feet. Bailing me out? When have you ever helped me, Evan? I raised you alone after your father died. I worked myself to the bone so you could have a better life. And now when I actually need you, her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. Now you accuse me of stealing from you? He crossed his arms, his expression hardening. You're right, Mom. You did raise me. But look where that got us. I'm drowning too, okay? My job's unstable. My finances are a mess. And every time I turn around, there's another problem. Another thing I have to fix because of you? Clara stared at him, disbelief and hurt warring within her. Was this really her son speaking? The boy she'd tucked into bed, read stories to, cheered on at soccer games. You think this is my fault? She whispered, tears welling up despite her best efforts to hold them back. You think I planned for any of this to happen? Evan sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what to think anymore. All I know is that I can't do this anymore. I can't keep saving you, Mom. You're a burden. Always have been. The words hit her like a freight train, knocking the air from her lungs. A burden. Her own son saw her as nothing more than a weight dragging him down. Before she could respond, Evan turned toward the door. I'll send someone to pick up the rest of your stuff, he said coldly. You're on your own, Mom. And then he was gone, leaving Clara standing in the middle of her tiny apartment, clutching the edge of the kitchen counter for support. Her legs felt weak, her vision blurred with tears. He hadn't just abandoned her emotionally, he'd left her physically homeless, with nowhere else to go. For hours she sat there staring blankly at the wall, replaying his words over and over in her mind. A burden. The phrase echoed like a cruel mantra, cutting deeper each time. When morning came, Clara packed what little she owned into 2 suitcases and left the apartment. She found a cramped studio on the outskirts of town, barely big enough to fit a bed and a chair. As she settled into the unfamiliar space, she couldn't shake the feeling of invisibility, that somehow in the eyes of the world, she no longer mattered. Little did she know, a stranger's letter would soon arrive, carrying with it the promise of redemption and a chance to reclaim not only her independence, but also her sense of self-worth. Clara's days fell into a grueling rhythm. The cramped apartment became both her refuge and her prison, as she juggled odd jobs to make ends meet. Mornings were spent scrubbing floors at a local office building, afternoons folding laundry at a dry cleaner, and evenings tidying up the community center where she occasionally volunteered. Her hands, once steady from years of nursing, now bore calluses, cracked skin, and faint traces of bleach stains. She told herself it was temporary, that she'd find her footing soon enough, but deep down the weight of her circumstances pressed heavily on her chest. One chilly afternoon, while taking out the trash behind the community center, Clara overheard snippets of conversation drifting through an open window. 2 women she vaguely recognized as neighbors sat inside, sipping coffee and chatting animatedly. Did you hear about Evan? One said, her voice carrying a mix of awe and envy. He just bought himself some fancy new car, a Tesla or something, says he's doing big things downtown. The other woman laughed lightly. Well, good for him. I always knew he'd land on his feet. Must be nice to have parents who set you up so well. Parents? Clara froze, gripping the edge of the dumpster lid. Parents who set him up? What did they mean? She hadn't given Evan anything. Not recently, anyway. If anything, he'd taken everything from her. Her stomach churned as their words sank in. Lavish lifestyle? A new car? How could Evan afford such luxuries when she was struggling to keep food on the table? Had he somehow accessed what remained of her savings? Or worse, had he lied about how dire his financial situation truly was? Betrayal sliced through her like a knife. It wasn't just the money. It was the sheer audacity of it all. He had thrown her out, accused her of being useless, and now here he was, living large, flaunting the very comforts she had sacrificed to provide him. Clara felt invisible again, reduced to nothing more than a stepping stone in her son's climb toward success. That night, unable to sleep, Clara found herself staring at an old photograph tucked away in a drawer. It was a faded picture of Henry standing proudly beside their family farm, his sun-weathered face lit with quiet pride. They had worked together for years to keep the place running, pouring sweat and tears into every acre. But there was something else in his expression, a hint of mystery, almost as if he carried secrets buried beneath the soil. She remembered the last time she'd asked him about selling the farm. He had grown unusually quiet, his eyes distant, before finally saying, "Some things are worth holding on to, Clara, even if we don't fully understand why." At the time, she hadn't pushed further. Life was hard enough without digging up old wounds. But now, sitting alone in her dimly lit apartment, those words echoed back to her with renewed significance. What had Henry meant? Was there more to the farm than met the eye? And why had he never shared whatever thoughts lay hidden behind that enigmatic gaze? As dawn broke, casting weak light through her threadbare curtains, Clara resolved to revisit the farm, or at least what remained of it. Maybe answers lay buried there, waiting to be uncovered. For the first time since losing everything, she felt a spark of determination ignite within her. Whatever secrets Henry had kept, whatever truths lingered in the overgrown fields, she owed it to herself to uncover them. Clara's days had fallen into a rhythm of quiet desperation. Each morning she woke to the same view, a narrow strip of sky visible through her apartment window, and the same gnawing sense of invisibility that had followed her since Evan's betrayal. She cleaned offices by day and spent evenings sorting through old boxes, relics of a life she barely recognized anymore. Among faded photographs and yellowed letters, memories stirred, but they brought little comfort, only reminders of how much she'd lost. One afternoon, as Clara sifted through a dusty shoebox filled with mementos from her marriage, something caught her eye. A small envelope sat tucked beneath an old postcard, its edges frayed and slightly discolored. Her name was written on the front in bold, unfamiliar handwriting, Clara Thompson. There was no return address. Curiosity tugged at her, and she carefully tore open the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, crisp and formal, bearing the insignia of a legal firm. As Clara scanned the contents, her heart began to race. The letter explained that Margaret Henshaw, an attorney and purported friend of Henry's, had been entrusted with information about a hidden investment, a rare mineral deposit on their family farm. Recent geological surveys had revealed its immense value, now skyrocketing due to market demand. According to the letter, Clara stood to inherit millions. Her hands trembled as she read the words over and over, each line sinking deeper into her consciousness. Millions. How could this be possible? Henry had never mentioned anything like this, not once in their 30 years together. And yet here it was, undeniable proof of his secret foresight. As shock gave way to emotion, tears welled up in Clara's eyes, not just from disbelief, but from the realization that Henry had left her one final gift, a lifeline when she needed it most. But alongside gratitude came confusion. Why hadn't he told her? Had he doubted she'd understand? Or had he simply wanted to protect her from potential disappointment if the investment failed? The letter ended with Margaret urging Clara to contact her immediately to claim what was rightfully hers. Below the signature, there was a handwritten note in delicate cursive. "Henry spoke of you often, Clara. He loved you deeply and always believed in your strength. I hope this brings you peace." For a moment, Clara sat frozen, clutching the letter tightly in her hands. This wasn't just money, it was validation. It was freedom. For so long, she'd felt trapped by circumstances beyond her control, defined by others' expectations and dismissals. Now suddenly, she held the power to rewrite her story. But even as hope flickered within her, doubt lingered. Could she trust this stranger? Was this some cruel twist of fate meant to lure her back into vulnerability? Yet deep down, Clara knew. This was real. Henry's quiet pride, his unspoken sacrifices, his enigmatic gaze. They all made sense now. He had been planning for her future, ensuring she'd have the means to stand on her own if ever she needed to. That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. What would she do with such wealth? Would it mend the fractures in her life or expose new ones? One thing was certain. She wouldn't let anyone take this away from her. Not Evan, not anyone. This was her chance to reclaim not just her financial security, but her dignity, her independence, her very identity. By dawn, Clara had resolved to act. She picked up the phone and dialed the number provided in the letter. When Margaret answered, her voice warm and reassuring, Clara felt a spark of courage ignite within her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them head on, for herself and for the legacy Henry had entrusted to her. The drive to the old farm was longer than Clara remembered, each mile stretching her heart with a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. As she pulled up the winding dirt road, the sight of the once beloved property hit her like a wave. The fields were overgrown, wild grasses swallowing the remnants of rows where crops used to grow. The barn leaned slightly to one side, its red paint faded into streaks of gray and rust. It felt both familiar and foreign, a ghost of the life she'd shared with Henry. Clara stepped out of her car, the crunch of gravel beneath her shoes breaking the silence. She took a deep breath, letting the earthy scent of soil and damp wood fill her lungs. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the laughter, the hard work, the quiet evenings sitting on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. But those memories were tinged now with questions. Why had Henry kept this secret from her? What else had he hidden? Her footsteps echoed softly as she approached the barn. The heavy wooden doors groaned in protest when she pushed them open, revealing a space frozen in time. Tools hung on the walls, covered in cobwebs. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light streaming through cracks in the roof. And there, tucked away in a corner behind an old workbench, was a metal box she didn't recognize. Heart pounding, Clara knelt and pried it open. Inside were papers yellowed with age, legal documents, geological surveys, and letters addressed to Henry from a mining company. Her hands trembled as she read through them. They confirmed what Margaret's letter had said. Years ago, Henry had invested in mineral rights for the land. Recent discoveries had skyrocketed the value of the deposit, making it worth millions. Shock rippled through her, followed quickly by anger. How could he have kept something so monumental from her? All those years they'd struggled, scraping by month after month, while this treasure lay buried beneath their feet. The betrayal stung sharply, even though Henry was no longer here to explain himself. A memory surfaced unbidden, pulling her back to a summer evening decades earlier. She and Henry sat at the kitchen table, bills spread out between them. Clara had been frustrated, venting about how tight money was. Henry listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she finally ran out of steam, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Trust me, Clara," he'd said, his voice low but firm. "I'm doing everything I can to make sure we're taken care of. Just give it time." At the time, she'd attributed his evasiveness to stress, chalking it up to his natural tendency to shoulder burdens alone. Now, standing in the dusty barn surrounded by evidence of his secret, she saw it differently. He hadn't just been shouldering burdens. He'd been planning something big, something meant to secure their future. But why keep it from her? Why let her worry, let her sacrifice without giving her even a hint of hope? Another flashback flickered in her mind. This one was clearer, more vivid. A rare night off, the two of them lying in bed, talking about retirement. Henry had smiled faintly, his eyes distant. "When the time comes," he'd said, almost to himself, "you'll see. I want it to be perfect." Perfect. That word lingered in Clara's thoughts now, echoing against the walls of the barn. Had this been his idea of perfection? A surprise so grand it would overshadow all their struggles? Or had he simply doubted she'd understand? Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the words on the documents in her hands. She wanted to be angry. She was angry. But beneath it all, she couldn't deny the ache of love still lingering for the man who had given her this final gift. Henry's secretive nature had always been part of who he was. Practical, reserved, unwilling to share until everything was certain. In his own way, he must have believed he was protecting her. But protection wasn't the same as partnership. And that realization left Clara grappling with conflicting emotions. As she stood in the shadow of the barn, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her, she resolved one thing. Whatever Henry's reasons, this inheritance belonged to her now. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. Freedom to rewrite her story, to reclaim the pieces of herself she'd lost over the years. And maybe, just maybe, it was also a chance to show Evan exactly what it meant to take responsibility for your choices, your actions, and the people you claim to love. The envelope from Margaret had been a lifeline, but it also became a wedge. Word of the inheritance spread quickly, too quickly for Clara's comfort. She hadn't told anyone about the letter or the mineral deposit on the farm, yet somehow, whispers reached ears she never intended them to reach. It started with Evan. One evening, as Clara sat in her small apartment sipping tea and flipping through an old photo album, there was a knock at the door. Her heart sank when she opened it to find Evan standing there, his expression unreadable. He looked different, gaunt, almost fragile, but his voice carried the same entitlement she remembered all too well. "Mom," he began, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I heard about the money, the inheritance." Clara crossed her arms, her defenses rising immediately. "Who told you?" Evan hesitated, clearly unprepared for her sharp tone. "Does it matter? Look, I just want to make sure you're okay. That's a lot of money, Mom. You'll need help managing it." Her stomach churned. Managing it. Of course, that's what this was about. Not concern for her well-being, but control over her newfound wealth. "I'm fine, Evan," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I've already spoken to lawyers. Everything is under control." He frowned, pacing the tiny living room like a caged animal. "You shouldn't have to deal with this alone, Mom. Let me handle it. I can take care of everything. Investments, taxes, whatever you need. You won't even have to think about it." Clara stared at him, disbelief mingling with anger. Was he serious? After everything he'd done, after accusing her of being useless, after throwing her out, he expected her to hand over control of her life savings? Again? "Evan," she said slowly, enunciating each word with deliberate calm, "you lost the right to tell me what to do with my money, or anything else, a long time ago." His face flushed, embarrassment warring with frustration. "Come on, Mom, don't be like that. I'm trying to help." "No," she interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You're trying to manipulate me again, just like last time. But it won't work. Not anymore." For a moment he looked genuinely shocked, as if he couldn't believe she'd stand up to him. Then his mask slipped back into place, and he shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Fine, suit yourself. But don't come crying to me when things get complicated." And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving Clara trembling with a mix of rage and relief. At least now she knew where they stood, where he stood. There was no remorse, no real change, only greed masked as concern. But Evan wasn't the only one who came knocking. Over the next few days, Clara's phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from people she barely remembered. Distant cousins, estranged in-laws, even an old friend of Henry's who suddenly seemed eager to reconnect. Each conversation followed the same pattern, a casual inquiry about how she was doing, followed by thinly veiled hints about the inheritance. "Clara, dear," cooed her cousin Louise during one particularly grating call, "you must be overwhelmed with all this new responsibility. If you ever need advice or someone to share the load, you know I'm here for you." Share the load. Clara almost laughed. They weren't offering support. They were circling like vultures, waiting for their chance to swoop in and claim a piece of what wasn't theirs. With each interaction, Clara felt the walls around her heart hardening further. These weren't people who cared about her. They were opportunists, seeing her not as a person, but as a paycheck. Even Henry's memory felt tainted by their greed. How dare they exploit his legacy like this? Late one night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, Clara found herself questioning everything. Who could she trust? Who truly cared about her, beyond what she could provide? The betrayal cut deeper than she'd anticipated, reopening wounds she thought had begun to heal. Yet amidst the pain, a spark of clarity emerged. This inheritance wasn't just a gift, it was a test, a chance to reclaim not only her financial independence, but also her emotional sovereignty. She wouldn't let anyone, not Evan, not Louise, not anyone, dictate how she lived her life or spent her money. She thought back to Henry's secretive nature, his quiet pride. Maybe he had known exactly what he was doing when he hid the investment. Maybe he had foreseen this very moment, knowing Clara would rise to meet it with strength and resolve. By morning, Clara had made her decision. She changed her number, hired a trusted attorney, and drafted a will ensuring her assets would go exactly where she wanted them to, far away from grasping hands. For the first time in years, she felt truly in control. But as she sat at her kitchen table, penning a note to Margaret thanking her for uncovering Henry's secret, Clara couldn't shake the lingering question. Was forgiveness still possible? Or had the damage gone too far? A week after receiving Margaret's letter, Clara found herself sitting across from the woman at a quiet corner table in a local cafe. Margaret was older than Clara had imagined, her silver hair neatly styled, her hands adorned with faded rings that hinted at a life rich with stories. Yet there was a warmth to her, an ease in her presence that immediately put Clara at ease. "I can't tell you how much Henry spoke about you," Margaret began, stirring her tea with deliberate care. "He admired your strength more than anything. Said you were the kind of person who could weather any storm." Clara blinked back tears, surprised by the lump forming in her throat. She hadn't expected this. A stranger confirming what she'd long doubted, that someone, somewhere, had seen her sacrifices and believed in her resilience. "Henry kept things close to his chest," Margaret continued, leaning forward slightly. "But when he talked about you, it was always with pride. He trusted you completely, Clara. That's why he made sure this investment was tied to you, and only you." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, rippling through Clara's thoughts. For years, she'd felt invisible, as though her efforts went unnoticed. But now, hearing Margaret recount Henry's faith in her stirred something deep within, a flicker of validation she hadn't realized she needed. "He never told me," Clara murmured, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her finger. "All those years, I thought maybe he didn't think I was capable of handling big decisions. Or worse, that he didn't trust me enough to share them." Margaret shook her head firmly. "Oh no, Clara. It wasn't distrust. If anything, it was quite the opposite. Henry knew you'd rise to the occasion. He often said you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for, including yourself." For a moment, Clara let the truth of those words sink in. Stronger than anyone gave her credit for. Could that include herself? She had spent so many years defining her worth by how much she gave to others, Carlos, Evan, everyone else, that she'd forgotten to measure her own strength on its own terms. As if sensing Clara's internal shift, Margaret placed a gentle hand over hers. "This inheritance isn't just money, Clara. It's freedom. Use it for you. Don't fall into the trap of giving it away to people who don't truly value what you've done for them." Her advice struck a chord. Clara nodded slowly, realizing how easy it would be to slip back into old patterns, to use the money to fix problems for others, to smooth over relationships that had been fractured by neglect or betrayal. But Margaret was right. This wasn't about fixing anyone else anymore. This was about rebuilding herself. In the weeks that followed, Clara threw herself into rediscovering pieces of her identity that had been buried under decades of duty. One afternoon, while walking through the neighborhood, she stumbled upon a flyer advertising volunteer opportunities at a community garden. The idea sparked something inside her, a chance to reconnect with the earth, to nurture something alive and growing, just as she had once nurtured her family. On her first day, Clara arrived early, her hands trembling slightly as she held a pair of gardening gloves she'd dug out from the back of her closet. The air smelled of damp soil and fresh leaves, and sunlight filtered through the trees overhead, casting dappled shadows on the ground. As she knelt beside a patch of wildflowers, trowel in hand, she felt a familiar rhythm return. The steady pull of weeds, the careful planting of seeds, the satisfaction of seeing order emerge from chaos. Over time, the garden became more than just a place to volunteer. It became a symbol of her growth. Each bloom reminded her of her own resilience, each root a testament to the strength hidden beneath the surface. Here, among the rows of vegetables and flowers, Clara began to feel whole again, not because she was helping others, but because she was nurturing herself. One evening, as she packed up her tools and prepared to leave, Lila, the elderly neighbor who had befriended her months earlier, approached with a basket of freshly picked tomatoes. "You've got a real gift here, Clara," Lila said warmly, gesturing to the thriving plants around them. "It's like you've brought this whole garden back to life." Clara smiled, feeling a swell of pride she hadn't experienced in years. "I guess I just needed a reminder of what it feels like to grow something for myself." And for the first time in a very long time, Clara understood exactly what that meant. The confrontation with Evan came sooner than Clara expected. She had just returned from volunteering at the community garden, her hands still smelling faintly of soil, when she heard a sharp knock at her door. Her heart sank as she opened it to find him standing there. His suit rumpled, his face etched with desperation. "Mom," Evan began, pushing past her into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." Clara closed the door slowly, her jaw tightening. This wasn't going to be pleasant. She could already feel the weight of his intentions pressing down on her. "What do you want, Evan?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. He turned to face her, his expression a mix of frustration and something else. Was it guilt? "I know about the inheritance," he said bluntly, his tone carrying an edge of accusation. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara's stomach churned. So that was why he was here. Not because he cared about her or wanted to repair their fractured relationship, but because he saw an opportunity. The realization stung, but instead of crumbling under the hurt, she felt something else rise within her. Anger. Anger not just at him, but at herself for allowing him to treat her this way for so long. "You didn't deserve to know," she replied, her voice firm. "Not after what you did to me. You threw me out, Evan. You called me a burden. And now you think I owe you anything?" Evan flinched but quickly masked it with indignation. "That's not fair, Mom. I was stressed. I made a mistake. But this is different. This money could change everything for both of us. We could fix things together." Clara stared at him, incredulous. Fix things? Was he serious? Did he really believe that throwing around words like mistake erased the pain he'd caused her? That he could waltz back into her life expecting forgiveness and access to her inheritance? "No," she said sharply, cutting him off before he could continue. "This isn't about fixing anything, Evan. This is about you wanting something from me again, just like always." His eyes widened slightly, caught off guard by her directness. "That's not true," he protested weakly. I thought we were family. I thought we helped each other." Clara stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. For years, she'd let him walk all over her, believing she had no choice but to endure it. But not anymore. Not now. "We are family, Evan," she said, her voice low but laced with steel. "But being family doesn't mean letting someone treat you like a bank account. It doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity for someone who doesn't value you. I'm your mother, Evan, not your ATM. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Evan looked at her, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words to say. But there were no magic phrases, no apologies that could undo the damage he'd done. "I don't expect you to understand yet," Clara continued, softening slightly but maintaining her resolve. "But I won't let you manipulate me anymore. If you want to rebuild our relationship, fine. Do it honestly. Show me you've changed. Not because you want something from me, but because you genuinely care." Evan's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, Clara saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. He nodded slowly, muttering a quiet, "Okay," before turning toward the door. As he left, Clara felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Relief, sadness, and most unexpectedly, pride. Pride in herself for standing up to him, for refusing to let him dictate the terms of her life any longer. This marked a turning point, not just in her relationship with Evan, but in how she viewed herself. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a survivor. And though she remained cautious, knowing trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. She was finally taking control of her own story. The day Clara claimed the inheritance felt surreal, like stepping into a life she had only glimpsed in dreams. After months of legal processes and consultations with Margaret, and later her own trusted attorney, she finally signed the papers, transferring ownership of the mineral rights. The payout was staggering, $3 million. For someone who had spent decades pinching pennies and sacrificing everything for others, it was almost unfathomable. But Clara didn't let the windfall go to her head. Instead, she approached this newfound wealth with intention and purpose. She bought herself a modest home on the outskirts of town, a cozy place with wide windows that let sunlight pour in, and most importantly, a sprawling backyard perfect for gardening. It wasn't extravagant, but it was hers. A space where she could breathe freely, surrounded by beauty she cultivated herself. In keeping with her values, Clara decided to give back. She donated a significant portion of the money to the community center where she volunteered, a gesture honoring her years as a nurse and her commitment to helping others. With her contribution, the center expanded its services, offering free health workshops, youth mentorship programs, and even a small garden for residents to tend together. It became a cornerstone of the neighborhood, just as Clara had always hoped to be. Meanwhile, Evan's world was unraveling. His reckless spending habits, combined with poor financial decisions, had caught up with him. He lost his high-paying job after an audit revealed discrepancies in his accounts. Without savings or a safety net, he quickly spiraled into debt. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to shoulder his burdens any longer. For the first time in his life, Evan found himself truly alone. Desperate and humbled, he showed up unannounced at Clara's new house one rainy afternoon. She opened the door to find him standing there, drenched and visibly shaken. Gone was the entitled man who had once accused her of being a burden. In his place stood someone broken, searching for redemption. "Mom," Evan began, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I've been so wrong about everything. I took you for granted, treated you like you didn't matter. But you do. You always have." Clara crossed her arms, studying him carefully. Part of her wanted to soften immediately, to pull him close and tell him everything would be okay. But another part, the stronger, wiser part, knew better. Forgiveness wasn't earned through words alone. "I appreciate you coming here, Evan," she said evenly, "but saying you're sorry isn't enough. If you mean what you say, if you really want to change, you'll show me, not just tell me." Evan nodded earnestly, tears welling in his eyes. "I understand, Mom. I messed up in ways I can't undo. But I'm trying to fix things, starting with myself. I need your guidance." Clara hesitated before speaking again. "You know the community center where I volunteer? They're short-staffed, especially with the new programs. Why don't you start there? Volunteer your time, not because you expect anything in return, but because it's the right thing to do. Actions speak louder than apologies, Evan." He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Okay, Mom, whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, Evan followed through. At first, he struggled. He wasn't used to manual labor or the patience required to work with people facing challenges. But gradually, he began to find purpose in serving others. Whether it was organizing supplies, mentoring teenagers, or assisting seniors during group activities, Evan threw himself into the work. For the first time in years, he felt like he was contributing something meaningful. Not taking, but giving. Clara watched from afar, cautious but hopeful. She saw glimpses of the boy she had raised, the kind-hearted child who had once cared deeply about fairness and justice. This version of Evan was raw and imperfect, but he was genuine, and for now that was enough. One evening, as they sat together on Clara's porch overlooking her blooming garden, Evan turned to her. "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me. I know I don't deserve it, but I promise I'll keep working to earn your trust." Clara smiled softly, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "Evan, forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about moving forward, with honesty, effort, and love. You're my son, and I'll always care about you. But remember this, no one owes you anything. Not me, not anyone. You build trust by showing up, day after day, and doing the work." Evan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. As they sat in companionable silence, Watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. Her journey hadn't been easy. It had been marked by pain, betrayal, and loss, but it had also brought her to this moment, a moment of healing, growth, and renewal. Clara's new home was more than just a house. It was becoming a sanctuary. Each morning, she woke to the soft light streaming through her windows and stepped outside into the garden she had started cultivating. The once empty backyard now brimmed with life, vibrant marigolds, delicate lavender bushes, and climbing roses that framed the fence like nature's artwork. Every bloom felt like a testament to her resilience, a reminder of how far she'd come. She began inviting neighbors over. Lila especially loved spending afternoons sipping tea on Clara's porch, while they shared stories about their lives. Lila often praised Clara for her green thumb, but Clara knew it wasn't just about the plants. It was about creating something beautiful from the ground up, much like she was doing with her own life. One crisp autumn morning, Clara decided it was time to visit the farm one last time. She packed a small bag with essentials, a thermos of coffee, an old blanket, and Henry's favorite book, and drove out to the property. As she walked among the overgrown fields, memories washed over her in waves. This land had been their foundation, their dream, and now, thanks to Henry's foresight, it had given her a second chance at independence. Sitting beneath the sprawling oak tree where she and Henry used to picnic, Clara opened his book and traced her fingers over its worn cover. For so long, she had resented his secrecy, questioning why he hadn't trusted her enough to share his plans. But as she sat there surrounded by the quiet hum of nature, clarity settled over her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Henry hadn't kept the investment secret because he doubted her. He had done it because he believed in her strength. He knew she could handle whatever came her way, even if it meant discovering the truth after his passing. "I forgive you," Clara whispered aloud, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "And I forgive myself too." For years she had carried guilt, not just for Henry's sacrifices, but for her own choices. She had poured herself into others, neglecting her dreams, desires, and even her sense of self-worth. But sitting here, amidst the rustling leaves and earthy scents of the farm, she realized that forgiveness wasn't just for Henry, it was for herself. She had spent decades giving everything to others, and now it was time to reclaim what was hers: joy, peace, and fulfillment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the fields, Clara stood and took one final look around. The farm would always be a part of her story, but it no longer defined her future. With a deep breath, she turned back toward her car, ready to return to the life she was building, one rooted not in obligation, but in freedom. Back at her cozy home, Clara continued nurturing her garden, her friendships, and most importantly, herself. She hosted small gatherings, cooked meals that delighted her senses, and spent evenings reading novels she had long neglected. Her days were filled with purpose, not because she was serving others, but because she was finally living for herself. Though Evan still had work to do to rebuild their relationship, Clara allowed herself to hope, not because she expected perfection, but because she understood that healing took time for both of them. And as she watered her flowers or greeted a neighbor with a warm smile, Clara knew one thing for certain: she was no longer invisible. She was seen, valued, and cherished, not just by those around her, but by herself. Evan's transformation didn't happen overnight, but it was evident in the small, deliberate actions he took to prove himself. One Saturday morning, Clara arrived at the community garden to find him already there, kneeling beside a patch of soil with gardening gloves on his hands. He looked up as she approached, his expression a mix of nervousness and determination. "I thought I'd start here," Evan said, gesturing to the plants around him. "Lila mentioned they could use some extra help." Clara studied him for a moment, her heart caught between skepticism and hope. This wasn't just about earning her forgiveness. It was about showing her, and perhaps himself, that he was capable of change. She nodded slowly, setting down her tools. "Let's see what you can do," she replied, her tone measured but not unkind. For hours they worked side by side, pruning bushes, planting seeds, and hauling mulch. At first their conversation was stilted, filled with awkward pauses and tentative remarks. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Evan began opening up, sharing stories about his struggles and the lessons he'd learned since hitting rock bottom. "I'm not proud of who I was, Mom," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to be better. For me, for you, for everyone I've hurt." Clara listened quietly, her gaze fixed on the task at hand. She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, but years of betrayal had taught her to guard her heart. Still, she couldn't deny the sincerity in his words or the effort behind his actions. The boy she had raised, the one who used to laugh as she taught him how to plant tomatoes in the backyard, felt closer than he had in years. As weeks turned into months, Evan continued volunteering at the garden. His presence became a regular fixture, and the other volunteers began to warm to him. They praised his dedication, noting how he stayed late to clean tools or offered to assist elderly members with heavy lifting. Clara watched from afar, allowing herself to feel a flicker of pride. These were small steps, but they mattered. One afternoon, as they watered the newly planted flowers together, Clara finally spoke the words that had been weighing on her mind. "You're doing good work, Evan," she said softly, meeting his eyes. "I see the effort you're putting in, and I appreciate it." Evan stopped mid-motion, the watering can dangling loosely in his hand. For a brief moment, he seemed speechless, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. "That means more than you know." Though trust remained fragile, Clara allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new, not just for Evan, but for both of them. Together, they were learning to rebuild what had been broken, one small act of kindness at a time. As the months passed, Clara noticed subtle shifts in the lives of those who had once sought her inheritance. The cousin who had pressed her for financial help saw his struggling business collapse under mounting debts. Another relative who had tried to guilt her into sharing her wealth faced eviction from their home after a failed investment scheme. Though these events might have seemed like karma balancing the scales, Clara refused to take satisfaction in their misfortunes. Instead, she focused on maintaining her own peace and independence. Clara had learned that dwelling on others' failures only tethered her to the past, a place she no longer wished to inhabit. She understood now that true empowerment came not from watching others falter, but from forging ahead with grace and purpose. While it was impossible to ignore the irony of their situations, she chose not to let bitterness or schadenfreude creep into her heart. These were their lessons to learn, just as she had learned hers. Instead, Clara poured her energy into nurturing her new life, tending to her garden, volunteering at the community center, and building meaningful connections with people who valued her for who she was, not what she possessed. When news of her relatives' struggles reached her, through whispers at the grocery store or an offhand comment from Lila, she simply nodded quietly, feeling neither vindicated nor vengeful. Their choices were theirs alone, just as her journey was hers. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Clara reflected on how far she'd come. The weight of anger and betrayal that had once burdened her was gone, replaced by a profound sense of clarity. Karma, she realized, wasn't about punishing those who wronged you. It was about freeing yourself from their hold over your emotions. And in that freedom, Clara found her greatest victory. The morning sun filtered through Clara's garden, casting golden light over the vibrant blooms she had nurtured with such care. She stood amidst her flowers, inhaling their sweet fragrance, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. Each petal seemed to whisper a story of resilience, a reflection of her own journey. Nearby, on an easel tucked under the shade of a tree, rested a painting she had recently started, a canvas alive with swirling colors that mirrored the life bursting from her garden. It was her first attempt at capturing the beauty around her, and though it wasn't perfect, it was hers. Every brushstroke carried a piece of her newfound confidence, a testament to the woman she had become. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket, breaking the peaceful silence. Glancing at the screen, she saw Evan's name flash across it. For a moment, hesitation gripped her. Old memories threatened to surface, but she answered anyway, her voice calm and steady. "Hey, Mom," Evan began, his tone lighter than she'd heard in months. "I just wanted to share something with you." Clara tilted her head slightly, curiosity piqued. What is it? I've been mentoring this kid at the community center, he explained, pride threading through his words. He's young, barely out of high school, but he's got potential. I've been helping him figure out some things, like how to navigate life when everything feels overwhelming. A small smile tugged at Clara's lips. This was progress, not grand or dramatic, but real. The Evan she once knew would never have taken time to guide someone else, let alone speak about it with such sincerity. Still, forgiveness wasn't something she could rush. Trust took time to rebuild, brick by brick, moment by moment. That's good, Evan, she said finally, her voice warm but measured. It sounds like you're making a difference. For him, and maybe for yourself too. There was a pause on the other end, as if Evan were searching for the right words. Thanks, Mom. I wanted you to know I'm trying. Really trying. Clara nodded even though he couldn't see her. I know you are, and that means something to me. They ended the call shortly after, leaving Clara standing in the quiet embrace of her garden. She looked down at the painting again, then out at the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. Her heart wasn't fully healed, not yet, but it was mending. Hope had begun to bloom alongside her plants, fragile but persistent. As she gazed at the horizon, where the sky stretched endlessly before her, Clara allowed herself to reflect. She thought about all she had lost, her marriage, her son's trust, her sense of purpose. But she also thought about what she had gained, a home filled with peace, friendships rooted in authenticity, and most importantly, a rediscovered sense of self-worth. I lost everything once, she murmured aloud, her voice soft but sure. But I found myself. That's worth more than millions. And with that quiet realization, Clara turned back to her garden, ready to nurture the next season of growth, not just in her plants, but within herself.